Georgie and Mandy's first marriage's Connor story highlights the couple's Big Bang Theory tragedy. When young Sheldon ended, Georgie and Mandy M.C. Allister's story became one of the most unexpectedly emotional arcs in the Big Bang Theory universe. Their marriage, their family, and the quiet ways they evolved gave viewers a rare window into the Cooper family's next generation. But one detail stands out above all: their son, Connor. What began as a hopeful continuation of their love story in the spin-off Georgie and Mandy's first marriage has slowly turned into a mirror of the same heartbreak that defined the original Big Bang Theory. Connor's story doesn't just give meaning to Georgie and Mandy's relationship. It highlights the deep generational tragedy that has always haunted the Coopers. The Coopers' legacy, a family defined by distance. From the very start of the Big Bang Theory, Sheldon painted a complicated portrait of his Texas family. His stories about his father, brother, and sister were often colored by disdain or embarrassment, and in his mind, he was the only one who truly escaped. When young Sheldon premiered, it offered a chance to correct, or at least complicate, that version of events. We saw a more layered George Sr., a strong yet struggling Mary, and a family that loved each other deeply even through dysfunction. But there was one inevitability hanging over young Sheldon. The Cooper family was destined to fracture. George S.R.'s death, Mary's overbearing religiosity, and Sheldon's alienation were canon long before the prequel aired. Georgie's future was equally bleak. In The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon mentions that Georgie became successful running a chain of tire stores, but the siblings are estranged. They hadn't spoken in years before reconciling in one brief, emotional appearance in Season 11. That's the backdrop that Georgie and Mandy's first marriage inherits, a family that was once loving but will eventually fall apart. And in many ways, the new spin-off's Connor storyline makes that inevitability even more painful. Connor becomes the symbol of what Georgie lost. Connor Cooper is, on paper, everything Georgie never was as a young man. He's grounded, thoughtful, and emotionally intelligent, the product of Georgie's determination not to repeat his own father's mistakes. In Georgie and Mandy's first marriage, Georgie takes pride in being a present father, trying to provide the stability he didn't always have growing up. But that's exactly why Connor's story hurts so much. For all of Georgie's good intentions, life keeps putting him in the same kind of impossible positions that broke his own parents. His business demands time and travel, Mandy's ambitions grow beyond Texas, and their marriage, despite its sweetness, starts showing cracks familiar to anyone who's watched The Big Bang Theory. Connor becomes a silent witness to that slow unraveling. He's not neglected, but he starts seeing less and less of his father. Georgie tries to make up for it through gifts and promises, echoing George S.R.'s attempts to balance work and family. And as viewers know from Sheldon's recollections, that never ended well the first time. In one of the show's most telling scenes, Connor asks Mandy if his dad used to be fun. Mandy smiles, a little too sadly, and says, "Your dad's still fun. He just has a lot to worry about now." That line feels small, but it encapsulates decades of Cooper family pain. Like George Sr. before him, Georgie is doing everything he can for his family, only to slowly lose touch with them in the process. The Big Bang Theory's tragic echo. The tragedy isn't just that Georgie may be repeating his father's mistakes. It's that we already know how this story ends. By the time of The Big Bang Theory, Georgie is living in Texas, wealthy, but emotionally isolated. He and Sheldon haven't spoken for years, and there's no mention of Mandy or Connor at all. That silence speaks volumes. Whether by divorce, distance, or disillusionment, Georgie and Mandy's relationship doesn't survive into Sheldon's adult life. Georgie and Mandy's first marriage is framed with an almost cruel honesty. The title itself hints that this may only be the beginning of a much longer, more complicated love story, and possibly one that doesn't end in lifelong happiness. Connor, meanwhile, becomes the bridge between these two eras of Cooper storytelling. He represents what Georgie and Mandy built together, but also what they, and the Coopers as a whole, inevitably lose. His very existence forces fans to confront the gap between young Sheldon's hope and the Big Bang Theory's reality. When Georgie appears in The Big Bang Theory as an adult, there's pride in his voice when he talks about his success, but there's also defensiveness, a hint of pain behind his bravado. We now know where that pain likely comes from. He's not just estranged from Sheldon. He's carrying the guilt of having repeated his father's mistakes despite trying so hard not to. Mandy's perspective. Love that outgrew its foundation. For Mandy, Connor's story is a reminder of how deeply she loved Georgie and how much that love cost her. Georgie and Mandy's first marriage gives her more dimension than she ever had in young Sheldon, exploring her post-motherhood identity and ambitions beyond domestic life. As she starts to rediscover her own passions, she becomes torn between the family she built and the dreams she left behind. Her love for Georgie never disappears, but she begins to see the ways they rushed into life together. What started as a surprise pregnancy and a marriage born out of obligation slowly grew into something real, but fragile. When she looks at Connor, she sees both her greatest joy and the reason she stayed in a life she sometimes questions. This is where the show becomes almost heartbreakingly mature. Mandy and Georgie's dynamic isn't about villains or victims. It's about timing, choices, and the quiet ways people grow apart even when they still care. Their struggles reflect George and Mary's before them, another generation repeating the cycle of love, pressure, and disconnection. The inevitable parallels. Georgie becomes his father. One of Georgie and Mandy's first marriage's most emotionally charged threads is Georgie's growing fear of turning into his dad. Early in the series, he idolizes George as our steadiness, finally seeing him as the hero Sheldon never did. But as years go by, Georgie starts living that same double life: businessman on the road, husband trying to make it all work, father who's too tired to keep up with his son's milestones. In one episode, Connor draws a family portrait with his mom and grandparents, but Georgie's face is just a small figure in the corner, drawn in pencil instead of color. Mandy tells Georgie not to read too much into it, but he does. That's the moment he realizes he's becoming a background figure in his own family's life. This subtle storytelling mirrors the emotional core of the Big Bang Theory's Cooper mythology. Sheldon never understood his father's struggles until long after George Sr. was gone. Georgie, on the other hand, understands too well, and that awareness becomes its own kind of curse. He knows what's happening, but he doesn't know how to stop it. The tragedy of knowing the future. There's a unique sadness in watching Georgie and Mandy's first marriage because fans already know where the road ends. In the Big Bang Theory, Georgie is alive and successful, but alone. Mandy and Connor are absent from his story, and that omission feels deliberate. It suggests that Georgie's emotional arc will come full circle. He'll become the kind of man Sheldon once pitied, even as Sheldon himself finally learns empathy and perspective through marriage and friendship. The cruel irony is that Georgie's tragedy gives meaning to Sheldon's growth. Without Georgie's sacrifices, the adult Sheldon might never have understood what real family costs. Connor's presence makes that tragedy tangible. He's a living reminder that the Coopers are a family defined not just by intelligence or ambition, but by the pain of misconnection, of loving each other deeply and still losing each other over time. The heart of it all, hope through heartbreak. Still, Georgie and Mandy's first marriage doesn't exist just to make fans sad. It's a love letter to the messy, imperfect beauty of growing up in a family that keeps trying, no matter how often it falls apart. Georgie and Mandy's love may not last forever, but it's real, and it changes them both for the better. In the show's quieter moments, when Georgie teaches Connor how to fix a tire, or when Mandy hums to him the same